We're going to continue today to look at some of the differences between the beliefs of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and traditional Christianity. And this time we're going to be talking a little bit about our different approach to church history. And we're going to do that by digging a little bit deeper into this idea of a total apostasy that came up last time and see if we can't offer something in the way of a defense for Christianity. So the idea of a great or a total apostasy is very foundational to Latter-day Saint beliefs. It's the reason that a restoration of the gospel was needed, that the gospel was lost and needed to be restored. And so if you dive into Latter-day Saint doctrine, one of the first things that you're going to hear a lot about is the apostate condition of Christianity. One of the instruction handbooks says this: following the death of Jesus Christ, the apostles were killed and priesthood authority, including the keys to direct and receive revelation for the church, was taken from the earth. Good people and much truth remained, but the gospel as established by Jesus Christ was lost. This period is called the Great Apostasy. Now, apostasy is a big word. It's a bold word. This is a very serious accusation. An apostate is not only somebody who believes a few wrong things, but someone who has renounced or is actively rejecting a belief. And in this case, that belief is the true gospel of Jesus Christ. So Christianity is not only unaware of the true gospel, it's not just that we're spiritually blind or something like that, but that in some sense we're actually oriented against the gospel, standing in opposition to the gospel. And so, of course, this is intimately connected to what Joseph Smith learned in the first vision, that all the churches are corrupt and all their creeds are an abomination. So according to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Christianity stands in opposition to the true gospel, and this opposition, this apostasy, began with the deaths of the 12 apostles. So by sometime around 100 AD, there were no genuine Christians left on earth. The gospel had been completely lost, and this period of darkness lasted a little over 1,700 years until Joseph Smith began his work. Again, very serious, very aggressive accusation. And to be honest, I've had lots of conversations about this, just trying to understand where people are coming from. But I have to be honest, whenever I've asked, why should I believe that this is true? Why should I believe this version of church history? I've only ever gotten two answers back. And now I'm very conscious of not wanting to misrepresent what Latter-day Saints believe. And so I'm not at all saying that nobody has reasons to believe beyond these two. I'm just saying these are the only reasons that I've been exposed to. And I think I've tried hard enough that I can confidently say, at the very least, that these are the top two. And the first, and by far the most common, is that Joseph Smith said that this is what happened. So if Joseph Smith is truly a prophet, then we can know that this is true as well. And 9 times out of 10, maybe more, that's the response that I've gotten. And the more we talk about it, the more this gets emphasized again and again. I know the church is true. I know that Joseph Smith is a prophet. Therefore, this must be true. But that's about as far as the conversation goes. To be honest, I can sympathize with that to some degree. I think, at least at the best of times, I think it reveals a very genuine trust that can be quite admirable. At the same time, though, the appeal to Joseph Smith is only compelling if I already believe that he's a prophet and can import that belief into this discussion. So, if you could show that this revelation of apostasy is verifiable through some other means, then I think that that could go a long way towards convincing me that he was a true prophet. Alternatively, though, if I can show that there are good reasons to doubt that a great apostasy happened, then that's going to cast some doubt on whether or not he was a genuine prophet. And so, in some ways, I'd be happy to have both of these claims stand or fall together, but it's not really that simple. They do have to be separated a little bit. The second reason that I have occasionally come across has to do with church structure. Part of the reason for the apostasy was that there was no prophet to sit in leadership over the whole church. And that's what the handbook is alluding to when it says priesthood authority, including the keys to direct and receive revelation, was taken from the earth. So Latter-day Saints believe very strongly in the necessity for a living prophet to be leading the church. And in answer to this point, when we look to the New Testament, Jesus actually did not appoint a prophet to succeed him in that way. He appointed his apostles to lead the church. And in 1 Corinthians, it actually explicitly says, God has appointed in the church first apostles, second prophets. And so that seems to me to be the biblical ordering, that prophetic ministry is subordinate to apostolic ministry. And we may talk more about that another time. Now, from a Christian perspective, I think that there are several other reasons for us to accept that early Christianity actually did remain faithful to the gospel message, that we did not, in fact, enter a period of total apostasy in the first century. And so I'll give some of those reasons here, 5 of them, and pretty quickly, and in order of what I think is strongest to weakest. So number 1, the promises of Jesus. Why don't I believe in a total apostasy? Because Jesus said, I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. So the church cannot be fully overthrown. It cannot enter a period of total abject darkness without calling into question the faithfulness of Jesus or his sovereignty. Jesus also said, behold, I am with you always to the end of the age. He's with us always. He doesn't take breaks from us when we're bad. Total apostasy suggests then that Jesus broke his promises, and on top of that, that his mission was a failure. The church that he built fell within a single generation. The darkness of apostasy, the gates of hell, in a sense, completely overwhelmed and smothered out the light of the gospel. And what's at stake here then is whether or not we can actually depend on Jesus, whether or not we can trust in his promises. And I think that we can. I fundamentally believe that Jesus keeps his promises. The second reason is the faithfulness of God. What we see through the whole Old Testament is that despite the repeated wanderings and rebellions of the nation of Israel, God always preserved his people. There's never been a time in the history of God's dealings with his people when he actually abandoned them. So at one point, Elijah complains to God that he's the only one left who's still serving God. And it's very dramatic. And God responds to him by saying, you're not actually. I have 7,000 that I have set apart as a remnant. And this is what we consistently see over and over again and again and again and again. The faithfulness of God perseveres over the wickedness of his people. No matter how evil we get, no matter how much sin or wrong belief we have, God will preserve his people. God will ensure that the light of the gospel is not extinguished from the earth. Number 3, discipleship. Jesus trained people who trained people who trained people. This is Jesus' model for the expansion of the gospel message, and it works because our faith is embodied, our faith is lived. And so Paul can say, be imitators of me as I am of Christ. That's the discipleship model in a nutshell. The discipleship model is an effective method for the transmission of the gospel from one generation to the next. And, just from a practical standpoint here, to believe in a total apostasy is to believe that the Apostle Paul, for example, was faithful and orthodox, but that Timothy, his true child in the faith, the direct recipient of his discipleship, was apostate. And not just Timothy, but Titus and Barnabas and Silas and everyone that was mentored by the apostles came to reject and oppose the gospel. Discipleship actually naturally guards against that kind of thing. Number 4, apostolic leadership. So we've already kind of mentioned this, but Jesus appointed his apostles to lead the church and to care for the church. In John 20:21, Jesus says to his apostles, peace be with you, as the Father has sent me, even so I am sending you. And I have a really hard time believing that Jesus sent his apostles with some kind of deficiency, that they would fail so miserably that the gospel is not only distorted under their leadership, but that it is completely abandoned and lost. That's a really tough sell, especially when we consider the apostolic role specifically to safeguard the message of the gospel, to protect the gospel. So Paul says, I received from the Lord what I also delivered to you. There's a carefulness. The apostles were very careful when it came to protecting and passing on the message of the gospel. For I received from the Lord what I also delivered to you. I didn't change it. I didn't tamper with it. I didn't alter it. I received it from the Lord and I gave it to you. And this role of the apostles to safeguard, to protect the message of the gospel is nowhere more apparent than in the New Testament as a whole. The New Testament is the apostolic preservation of the gospel message. They actually took time to write it down, to make sure that it wasn't distorted and that it wasn't corrupted. Number 5, historical integrity. We can actually look back to documented history from this period. We can compare faithful apostolic Christianity in the New Testament with what should be apostate Christianity in the years that follow. But when we do that, we find, first of all, that they are largely congruent. And so when it comes to what specifically the early church rejected about the gospel, what is the content of their apostasy, there's just not a lot there. And then we can also see that this accusation of total apostasy or of things that might be consistent with it is absent from the historical record. And that just isn't what you would expect to find, because people don't just all change their mind at the same time and in the same way. And when people disagree, especially about theology, they fight about it and they write about it. And so the idea of a total apostasy just is not a historically sustainable position. Now, I recognize that was a lot of information in a very short period of time. So just a couple of comments here to kind of wrap things up. I think the thing that I would really want to stress to Latter-day Saints is that, this isn't about going line by line through an argument. I know it can kind of feel that way in this sort of context. That's not conducive to real life conversation. It's not about going line by line through an argument. It's more about thinking through the substance of our beliefs and their implications, right? What does a total apostasy say about Jesus? And can I actually affirm those things? What does a total apostasy say about the nature and character of God? And how does it inform my relationship with him? Am I nervous that God is going to abandon me? Would I even know if he did? Because according to this narrative, God took the keys away, and it took 1,700 years for anybody to even notice that something had gone wrong. How can I know that that's not going to happen again? Not everything that comes to us as revelation is a genuine word from the Lord. And even within the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we're told sometimes prophets are speaking for God, and sometimes they are speaking as a man. And in this case, we have a biblically, theologically, historically falsifiable claim that the early church did a sharp 180 and fell into total apostasy, and it just doesn't stand up to questioning. It's not true to reality, and it's not true to the gospel. And that's actually a really good thing. This is good news for us because it means that we can be confident in the promises of God, that we can trust him, and that when he says, I will never leave you or forsake you, he means it. And that these kinds of promises aren't conditional on our beliefs, and they're not conditional on our behavior, but they're actually rooted and born out of the character of God. So no matter how much we struggle with sin or how many wrong beliefs we hold, God is not going to turn his back on his people or abandon us. He continues to love us and to extend his grace towards us, not because we are faithful, but because he is.